Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Get to Know OCD podcast by NOCD. My name is Chrissie Hodges, and I am a guest host today in place of Dr. Patrick McGrath. I'm a certified peer support specialist working with individuals all over the world, providing support as they're working toward recovery. And I'm also an OCD advocate, and you can find most of my stuff on YouTube at Chrissie Hodges. And today, I have the honor and pleasure of having a chat with Stephen Smith, the founder and CEO of NOCD. Hello, Stephen.
Thanks, Chrissie. Great to see you. Great to have you on the podcast. Appreciate your time.
Of course. Today we're going to talk about something that you and I have a lot of knowledge about, which is how far treatment has come in the past 10 or so years. And I'm using 10 years because that's really when we met. And so we have a clear picture of how much things have advanced, the accessibility, and even the ability to find out you have OCD quicker than we ever did at that time. So I definitely wanted to start with letting people know how we know each other and how we met back in good old 2014, 2015.
Yeah, right around that time. So what a blast from the past. This conversation is. But no, so we met in 2015. I was at the time reaching out to different people as we were just getting the NoC platform off the ground. We were trying to get word out, and we were I was personally in college, and I didn't have any money besides what I earned in college, and so was just taking the old fashioned guerrilla marketing approach, just calling everyone I possibly could know. And I think that's how you initially heard it from me. But I also
grapevine that there was some guy calling everybody cold calling. So I was expecting that phone call.
And you were expecting the phone call, so it all worked out. Well, things happen, right? But the interesting part was in our dialogue, I also had a personal connection to your content because your content was one of the reasons why I was able to then learn more about OCD and get treatment myself. And so, just for a quick story here. When I was going through the ringer with OCD, I would search compulsively on Google quite a bit, and I didn't know what I was going through as OCD, so I would just constantly Google search to try to figure out how to stop the recurring fears in my head. And in that process, I stumbled upon a forum, I believe it was Reddit, where someone was talking about like the exact same experience that I was going through, and I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a name for this. First of all, second of all, there are other people out there with it. Where I learned more. And as I was learning more, I stumbled upon your Pure O podcast. And that led me to learning all about treatment, all about, how this condition works. And that was one of the reasons why I ended up starting treatment. So in general, like you helped me quite a bit. And so it's interesting. Like we're coming here 10 years later talking about this whole problem. And the good news is a lot of it's been solved. There's still more to be solved, but a lot of it has been solved, which is really exciting. And I think, the benefit of talking about this is because it shows you what you can actually do when you put your mind to something, right? Mm-hmm. We knew there was a huge issue back in the day. I mean, treatment in general was extremely inaccessible. If you wanted to see a specialist in OCD, you have to wait on a wait list that typically lasted between 6 months to 2 years. You had to pay a price out of pocket that ranged from $300 an hour to $600 an hour.
They had to be in your local area.
You had to be in your local area. You had to drive to see a specialist if you were lucky enough to have one in your area.
Exactly.
And and the challenge was you couldn't even vet who effectively was trained to treat OCD or not. Like there were some directories, but there really wasn't a guarantee that, hey, look, these therapists, in fact, are trained to deliver evidence-based exposure response prevention therapy. So there are a lot of issues with access, but that was if you were lucky enough to simply get identified or understand that what you're going through had a name. So it's like that took on average, 14 to 17 years just to simply know if you had symptoms of OCD or if to even start treatment. And so the barriers were off the charts. And then finally, if you could get identified and get to a therapist and wait on the wait list, pay the price point, find someone near you that was trained. Then when you finally saw them, you were on your own between sessions,
right?
And you were suffering alone most of the time, and even when trying to apply treatment. So there were people who would get through the process inevitably, right? And it was simply just from chance. It felt like or just simple determination and support for family members. I feel fortunate. I was one of those people. It sounds like you were as well, Chrissy, from your
I was
story.
lucky.
But so I think it took many people to come together to look, this is not right. We have to figure out a different solution here to help other people who are in a similar place, but yet haven't been able to get through the whole treatment workflow. And if we remove friction from it, we'll ultimately change, how people with OCD live. And 10 years later, like, you can look back and say, wow, all 50 states and several countries, you can see a licensed therapist that specializes in OCD and ERP. They're vetted. They're able to, prove that they're vetted from different directories like yours. Second, you can see someone who is oftentimes in network. 1 in 2 Americans can access evidence-based ERP therapy, as well as get support, after they've gone through treatment in a more mindfulness-based manner. They can do that usually with just a insurance covered session, right? They could pay a copay of $25 an hour, $50 an hour, what have you, to actually do the treatment, which is totally different than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you have to pay, an arm and a leg just to get to treatment. And then, you could get seen within 7 days on average. And that's like unheard of. Or it was unheard of back in the day. It's unheard of for many other
It's unheard
conditions.
of.
Now it's something that's actually available. So, like, there's a lot of progress that have been made. Just on the access point, there's more progress that's being made on the awareness, and I'll let you address that, Chrissy. So I know it's a lot of your work, but I mean, it's really marvelous to see what can happen in 10 years, and it also gives excitement for what's to come.
Right. I think that with OCD in particular too, we were part of a really core group of amazing people who just really wanted to give back. You go through OCD, it's something that is just so brutal. It is almost your brain turning on yourself. And then when you find out what this is, there is a solution to what this is. There is effective treatment. You can get better. You can get your life back. A lot of people want to give back. They want to say, how can I help other people? And I do think that really a testament to what you do, what I have done in my career, Stuart Ralph, Aaron Harvey, people like that, just, being able to see that, like, yes, once you put your mind to something to help people very altruistically, big things can come. And NOCD is a huge example of that. I get messages now from people that will say, I just started having intrusive thoughts like a month ago, and now I found out what it is. And this just warms my heart. A month. Someone started having intrusive thoughts a month ago, and they know what it is. I mean, that is amazing progress right there. Considering
Yep.
when I went through treatment, I'd been living with it. I'd been living with it for 12 years at that point, and there was AOL dial-up. I mean, granted, that was way back in the day, but still, I mean, there was nothing, and it took me days to find a therapist. Now, I was one of the lucky people that I found my therapist, Dr. Phillipson, and he was willing to do phone sessions with me. But phone sessions, people, phone. Meaning there was no video back then. And I think this is why this conversation is so important. We are so advanced in 2025 that we forget that just a mere 10 years ago, therapists, lots of them would refuse to do video therapy. And it's not because they don't care about their patients. It was because there weren't platforms. It was unethical. There weren't any confidential platforms that they felt secure doing that. And that has all changed, all in what, 4 years, 4 or 5 years. Now you can rarely ever find a therapist that won't do telehealth. And this is such a big deal and a win for our community.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also quite a bit of, there's destigmatization around just getting treatment. Like back in the day, 10 years ago, there was a massive stigma barrier to just even seeking help for mental health conditions and concerns. That stigma has been, in my opinion, like almost entirely alleviated. Like people can talk very openly about going to treatment. The problem is there's still stigma surrounding why people want to seek treatment. It's like seeking treatment isn't stigmatized, but the why it still is. And so I think in the next 10 years, that's something that needs to change. It's going to be hard to change it though, because some of these topics, it's specifically related to OCD. Some of the topics are still very taboo, and OCD attacks what you love the most, and so it's hard to talk about some of the topics.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the topics that ultimately cause the most severity, or can cause the most severity. So there's quite a bit there, but I'd be curious to know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. I think there needs to, like, if you think about the problem, right? One, there wasn't enough awareness about OCD. Two, there wasn't enough accessibility to treatment. And three, there was not enough support between sessions when you finally were lucky enough to access evidence-based treatment. The second and third problem have really been solved, or they're being solved. Like it's not a function anymore of, can you get access to a great specialist for OCD, and can you get support between your therapy sessions? Like that's pretty much that infrastructure is built. The problem is there's still a lack of awareness because of that second layer of stigma. That's what really needs to be solved. And in my opinion, the only way you can really solve that is through more community-based awareness, like organic awareness. Like you've shown organic awareness. Stuart Ralph has shown organic awareness. There are other individuals that have led organic awareness campaigns. Ethan Smith. You look at Aaron Harvey, Kimberly Quinlan. Like there are a lot of people who have done great work. At the same time, that list needs to be like exponentially longer, right? And again, I'm obviously missing many great people just off the top of my head, but there's a lot of people that need to come forward and to really talk about this. Howie Mandel's done an amazing job of doing that in the last couple of years, in particular with his willingness to collaborate on the TV commercials. But there's just more. If this becomes if the symptoms of OCD become commonly understood, even if they're hard to talk about, what's going to happen is people are going to then naturally seek treatment. They're not going to tell you they have these symptoms because they're embarrassed by it, but they're going to at least find treatment in an easier way for their most crippling symptoms. Does that make sense? I think that's like where this industry needs to go if we're going to solve the problem in general.
Well, I think we are kind of the same way that 10 years ago, you and I could sit down in a room and say, here are the problems. How do we tackle them? Like now we're looking at those issues, and I can tell you some of the barriers right now, which is, I am one advocate that talks very openly about all things taboo, no matter what the topic. I also will tell you that I've been struck down by a particular platform that my videos are on, and I'm not going to say their name, but my channel has been on a warning before for talking about taboo topics. It doesn't matter how much I appeal it and tell them it's discrimination, yada, yada, yada. We're talking about AI now, looking for words that are offensive, and that they're not going to understand. And also, when you are putting that into the hands of people like myself and other people talking about that content, I'll just be as bold as I can to say that people are worried about losing followers because it's become a lot more of an influencer culture, unfortunately, when we're talking about altruistic advocacy. It's, I don't want to lose followers talking about pedophilia themed OCD, which is ridiculous considering that that's one of the most common themes that people really need the support and know that they're not alone, right? There's also cancel culture. So people are worried if they talk about these things that they're going to get canceled. So this is why we need people that are more than willing to talk about this, because as we know, in the evolution of the last 10 years, the more that we talk about these things, the more people are likely to join the bandwagon and talk about it because someone else has.
Yeah, I think that's right. It comes down to, though, how do you make content that generates awareness, that reaches people when they're suffering with these horrific fears? Like, because using the themes that you just described, like when people have really taboo fears, what happens is, from what we've seen at least, they naturally feel depressed more because they're all of a sudden feeling like they're suffering with this horrific...
Well, they have a higher degree of shame.
Like that shame leads to, think about depression, think about substance use disorders. Like that's what ends up happening because people don't know how to manage the distress. Mm-hmm. And like those are the people that need the most help, right? Like our system needs to be available for those people. Well, it's going to be hard to be available for those people if we don't know that that's what you're suffering with, because you're in so much shame. So it's like a negative flywheel. Like people just like, give you an example, a mother with a newborn child, last thing she ever is going to do is tell her PCP that she's going to harm her child because she's afraid
The fear
that
of the
she's going to
repercussion.
get caught repercussion. And she's going to also, as a result, she's probably going to feel very depressed. She's going to have heightened anxiety 24/7. She's going to maybe have a substance use disorder because she's trying to, figure out a way to manage her distress. She can't figure it out. So like that's a common, example, but yet we don't talk about that example enough, to your point. So the next wave of
Well,
awareness
some
has to
people
be,
don't.
some
I'm
people
like,
don't.
I'm like, that theme is in every single one of my videos for that
Right.
purpose.
Right. But some people don't. But I'm saying as a community as a whole, as a
Correct.
mental health care system as a whole,
Correct.
that's not talked about enough. So it's like what you're really seeing though, Chrissy, is like 10 years ago, the laundry list of problems that we were experiencing is just looking at the OCD, let's call it the OCD crisis, right? Like mental health crisis in the OCD community. Like it was very acute for a variety of reasons.
Right.
Today, that list of reasons has reduced to maybe like
Absolutely.
really one main reason. And because it's one main reason, you can actually solve it with focus. And in the next 10 years, if there's like a dedicated campaign to lifting stigma around these specific topics, it doesn't have to
Yes.
be like we shouldn't have to ask people to change their behavior. Like they're going to feel shame. That's not going to stop, because these are very like, taboo topics often. But what we have to do a better job of is creating content that reaches people in the
Yes.
places where they can actually consume it and realize, oh, wait
Right.
a second here. What I'm going through has a name. And it's not the
Right.
fact that I'm some monster. It's actually because I might have OCD. And if we solve this problem, given the infrastructure that's been created, I mean, the problem, meaning like the OCD crisis, that OCD crisis will go away. You'll still have
Right.
OCD, but people will be able to get managed in a more effective manner. In addition to that, that's also going to lead to like the long tail results will be like you'll have more insurance coverage too, because when
Correct.
you start to see that people actually have OCD and they're just suffering from these really peculiar subtypes that are actually relatively common, then you'll ultimately have more treatment available for them. Like that's how this works. From what we've seen, is that if you can raise awareness, you can help people who are typically suffering that normally go to lots of treatment, or who use lots of treatment from different providers. Then ultimately, those people can they can get better with evidence-based treatment as opposed to using treatment from other centers of care. And as a result, then not cost the system as much, but most importantly, live a healthy life. And that fuels incentives to then go and reach more people. So it's literally a flywheel that we can solve.
Well,
I'm really,
and to
yeah,
take
go
it
ahead.
one step forward too, it's not only the consumers, it's educating therapists, because of the sheer amount of practitioners out there that have no idea that OCD can attack your sexual orientation, that can attack your relationships, your, whether or not you're scared that you're going to harm someone, or if you're a pedophile or not. The sheer amount of therapists out there that will say you don't have physical compulsions, so you don't have OCD, is defeating for people who finally found this amazing content through NOCD or my videos or Stuart or whoever, and then go to a therapist and say, oh, I'm sorry, you're incorrect. The devastation in that is like, I think about that sometimes at 3 a.m. when I'm awake.
I would just say, like, in general, like, OCD is the one term which almost everyone recognizes and almost everyone misunderstands, and they don't realize they misunderstand it. And so it's like, if you change that though, and you do that by helping raise up awareness around specific subtypes,
Mm-hmm.
then eventually you'll get people to actually get to treatment faster, and you wouldn't need to go in and change provider behavior, because they'll also be part of that larger movement, being like, oh, look, this is what OCD really looks like. It's not Stephen Smith or Chrissie Hodges coming and talking to me. This is just from learning about this condition on my own. And that's
Okay,
what
so
needs to
how do we
happen.
do
That's what,
that?
yeah.
Let's plan.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think that's the question though that we should pose to people in the community. There are a lot of smart people with OC. That's what I've learned. Like, because it's
Oh
like, you
yeah,
think about the
and
creativity
creative.
it takes to just kind of think through all the different ways you can um or the
And our
creativity behind OC is pretty
proficiency at
prominent.
rumination.
Right. Exactly. It's like you can find so many loopholes in every bit of logic. So you get a lot of practice being creative. But I guess the question I have is if you gave a prompt to people in the OCD community about what needs to be done in the next 10 years, could we actually solve it as a community? For instance, if we were to say, look, the one question we want to ask you in the next 10 years, how do we get people to understand OCD equals fears about
Taboo
A,
and
B, C?
thoughts.
Yes. Like, how do you actually do that? Because that's the one problem now that needs to be solved. And if that
It
problem is
is.
solved, the OCD crisis will end because of the infrastructure that's now in place. So,
Okay, so we'll all meet Denver for a weekend to solve this problem.
well, I mean, I think there's that. There's also like, I'd love to know how that one question can be, I wonder how the community can answer that one question. Like not just those 5 people in a room,
A
but like
Super Bowl.
how do we get 70,000 people to answer this one question? Because you think about the odds that that question is answered correctly, or the prompt gets answered correctly from 70,000 people is actually, is actually pretty high.
It could be a poll too to see how many people think specific things, and then have it an area for comments as well.
Yeah. I mean, it should be a social campaign. It's like the OCD crisis will end if there is awareness raised about the common symptoms that make up OCD. How do we best raise awareness about these symptoms? Like that's really at this point.
Right, right. And by the way, I also want to praise NOCD for just how many therapists you've brought on board and educated on your own. I mean, so thank you for that. That's amazing in itself in spreading that awareness. But moving toward the recovery model, meaning a consumer has shared decision making, and a consumer, has control and agency in their own recovery. That is still something we need to work on.
I think that in the next 10 years, there has to be a model that fuels awareness. And that's frankly one of the things that we're trying to build at NOCD, is a way to showcase that, in fact, if you can deliver evidence-based therapy to the community and get people better, that actually might fuel, with both resources as well as with the number of advocates, the awareness that's needed to then get the rest of the community better. And, and so it's like, how do you do that? Well, in today's world, it's all through content, right? Organic content, particularly. Sometimes it's paid content, but there has to be a way to get people to talk about, not verbally per se, but sometimes even in writing, the symptoms that go alongside, OCD, especially in the most, taboo formats. Because again, if that's where the crisis is really felt the most today, that's where we need to really start. Those are people's lives. Like, there are people who come to us and say, look, if it wasn't for an OCD or my OCD specialist, like I probably, unfortunately, like would have succumbed to my OCD symptoms. Like that, we hear that, and it's actually a time game. Like, this is a very serious issue. Like, there has to be this level of awareness right now. And so I think in the next 10 years, like we talk about 10 years as a time frame, I think like the actual bulk of the awareness has to be done probably in the next 24 months.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I would be more than happy to share the burden of talking about some of the more taboo, intrusive thoughts with other people. Sometimes it does feel like there's only a handful of us out there that will just really just put like balls to the wall, just to be crude, but it's true. And at the end of the day, like, more people that are talking about this, not that it legitimizes it, but it does feel a little rogue being out there and being like, hey, today I'm going to talk about real event OCD with shit that may have happened in your childhood, that now you have pedophilia themed OCD. If people don't have any sort of context for that, or they can't like Google XXXYYZZ, right? They might just be like, that chick's crazy.
Yeah.
Well,
I think there's also, Chrissy, there's a like, not only do we have to talk about it, but how we talk about it and where we talk about it matters. So for instance, talking about it in a YouTube video is really impactful. Like, you could, for instance, reach millions of people hypothetically. You have actually done that with your content. And so the question is like, like, where do people find that content? How do you amplify that content? Because one video could help educate millions of people. So there
And
needs to
save
be
lives.
yeah, and save lives. There needs to be diversification of content created and people who are creating the content. But at the same time, there also needs to be amplification of that content.
I know.
That's what we have to. Right, but that is what is needed. So where people find that content matters. And to your point, like it's not readily accessible today in certain social media platforms because they're afraid of
Censor
the blowback. Right. Well, it's more than it's like we know how the OCD crisis will end at this point. It'll end if people can raise awareness. Like the last piece to the puzzle is raising awareness for these very less talked about issues while also getting more insurance coverage. Like those are the last two things. Really, the number one thing that has to be done, I should say this, there are two remaining points left to solve the OCD crisis. The first is we have to make, common but more shame-provoking symptoms of OCD known by pretty much everyone in society. Yes. And so that way, OCD won't be misunderstood. It'll be understood as a really severe psychiatric condition that requires specialty treatment. And second, we need to get more insurance coverage for all people who are suffering. So today, 1 in 2 Americans can access therapy for OCD, or specialized therapy, I should say, in OCD through their insurance. Unfortunately, it's not 2 of 2, right? So we have to get 2 of 2 Americans and then eventually scale insurance coverage globally. That's kind of how these things work. You have to first do it for us, like we're in the US, so we first do it in the US and then scale globally. And second, we need to make sure that OCD is actually understood and not just understood from a basic definition stance, but really from a core symptomology stance.
Correct. I feel the same way that I did when we met 10, 11 years ago, which is hopeful that some of these obstacles that are in place, we can work together as colleagues, as peers living with OCD to solve these for the community. The most important thing is getting people to the help they need and deserve, and that they are not alone in this.
Chrissie, this has been awesome. Thank you for your time today.
Of course.
And looking forward to continue the conversation.
The next 10 years. Cheers to the next 10 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. And for those of you that are looking for some content around taboo intrusive thoughts, please head over to my YouTube channel at Chrissie Hodges. And I also provide peer support one-on-one through groups and an online community. And you can find that at chrissiehodges.com.
Marty.